Now I'd like to introduce our first lecturer, Ali Noorani, the Executive Director for the National Immigration Forum based out of Washington, D.C., and a graduate of the Boston University School of Public Health, yay, terriers, will be speaking to us about the lessons learned from years of coalition building, unlikely alliances, and opportunities for partnership in pushing for federal immigration reform. Ali, I'll turn things over to you.
Something for me to spill. So first of all, I really want to thank everybody for coming into Boston this morning. Thank you very much to the staff and leadership of the Initiative on Cities, the Partnership with the New American Economy, and our good friends at Welcoming America. It's great to be surrounded by such critical members of such great cities. The work that you do every day is incredibly important to the communities that you serve. And, you know, just for the heck of it, I'll even include Chicago in that. It's a long, Chicago. It's like the Chicagoans. What can you do? But in any case, I also wanted to start this morning with a really sincere appreciation for Mayor Menino. I had a chance when I was here in Boston to work for the Environment Department in the city and run a program around environmental health issues, and I really came to appreciate the amount of the hard work, the dedication, and the commitment that Mayor Menino brought to the city. And he was known as a hardworking mayor, and he was everywhere. And he was just a remarkable, remarkable person. And we had a chance to work with Mayor Walsh when he was at the State House on in-state tuition and many other issues. And he was a great ally in the State House, and I'm sure he is going to be. He continues his great service as mayor of Boston. Mayor Dean, great to see you again as well. Thank you for having me. So I wanted to talk about a few things. First, a little bit about the political lay of the land in D.C., but also across the country. Talk a little bit about kind of the strategy that, as we see it, to get to immigration reform in 2017. I wanted to share some thoughts and get your feedback on, I think, the important role of cities in the regions that you serve. But then also, let's kind of think about what lies ahead in the collective work to pass immigration reform. Does that sound okay? Okay, very good. So politically speaking, there is apparently an election taking place in about 5 months. And I think we're going to have two presumptive nominees come Tuesday night, one being a Mr. Donald Trump, the other, more than likely, I think, being a Secretary Hillary Clinton. There are a few things kind of in motion here. First, the Supreme Court case. Supreme Court will rule in one fashion or another by the end of June. That's when their term is up. I'm not going to even begin to try to predict which direction they will go. They could rule in support of the program. They could rule against the program. They could thread the needle in some very, very complicated way. Or there's even a chance they could just kick it back and say we will rehear the case the next term. But the political impact of the decision is profound. If the court upholds the program in any way, shape, or form, I think we will see an incredible spike in energy and enthusiasm on the part of the community, but more importantly within Spanish language press, so that there will be a focus on implementation of the program and inviting members of the community to register for the program. I think the program will take probably about 2 months to stand up because DHS had to, in essence, go pencils up once the injunction was filed. It was put into action. So it'll be about a 2-month lag between not just the ruling, but the implementation of the ruling. So we won't really see the implementation of the program till the fall earliest, which means that it'll come up in the middle of what I'm sure will be a very contentious political season. I think that we may actually see Secretary Clinton in church basements enrolling families in DACA DAPA, should the program be upheld. If the program is struck down by the court in some fashion, I think there will be an incredible amount of energy and anger, frankly, from the community in terms of the parties that blocked the implementation of the program. I think from the Republican perspective, it's a very, very challenging time. Republicans who want to be in support of immigration reform, I think they see the benefit of the executive action from a policy perspective, but politically they're between a rock and a hard place, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we go. So, number one, Supreme Court case will roil the waters, and that will take place sometime between now and the end of the month, and may even take place while I'm talking, because Monday mornings are decision times at the Supreme Court. But I'm assuming that if that takes place, there will be even fewer people listening to me than there are now. White House. So Trump, Clinton. It is very clear that Donald Trump is tripling down on his attacks on the immigrant community. I think that he crossed a threshold when he went after Judge Curiel last week. It got to the point really where you had Senate and House and leading Republicans who have endorsed him distancing themselves from that comment. And then for him to say also over the weekend that a Muslim judge could not be fair and unbiased in passing judgment on a case that he might have in front of the court, I think is a real, it's a low watermark for that campaign and where the Republican Party is going. But on the other hand, I think within the Republican Party, you are seeing a very, very lively debate. There are many conservatives who do not like and will not support a Donald Trump, and they're looking for another option. On the Democratic side, the question will be how quickly can Clinton unite the party, and I think that a lot of that will come down to her choice of vice president. I think from a policy perspective on immigration issues, she's very, very solid. She has made a public commitment to moving immigration reform forward in the first 100 days. I think it's on us to hold her accountable to that pledge over the course of the campaign, and if she wins, to hold her accountable to that in the first 100 days of her administration. And if Trump wins, hold him accountable. And really, I think we would have to do everything we can to make sure that a potential Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jeff Sessions is not able to implement what he would want to implement. And I think, frankly, that's a story that is not being told here. Is you have a President Trump, but then who does a President Trump hire? And I think that as you are talking to media and others, I think that's a very important question for you to raise. Senate, we have a handful of competitive races. I think the money at this point is that the Democrats will take the Senate by really just a 1 to 2 vote margin. So I think to pass legislation in the Senate will continue to require a bipartisan strategy. The House to us is actually the most interesting and frankly most important. Because more and more, really in 2013 and 14, at the last legislative push, this came down to a House strategy. The Republicans will retain control of the House of Representatives. The chances are good that the Republican conference that Speaker Ryan leads will actually shrink a little bit, which means that the proportion of Freedom Caucus members within his conference will increase. But that's actually not an automatic disqualifier for us, because you have House Republicans who are Freedom Caucus Tea Party Republicans like Justin Amash from Michigan or a Mick Mulvaney from South Carolina, who are actually very good when it comes to immigration questions. You have to thread the needle, you have to help them be in the right place, which we'll talk about. But immigration presents itself as really the only crossover issue with potential come 2017. So before we move into the strategy, I would say, I would just say that we're very optimistic about 2017. We think that the way that this debate is going is presenting the American public with a very, very, very clear choice. And in our collective business, clear choices are good. You just have to win the choice. You just have to make sure people choose the right way, right? Is that fair? But if it ends up where you have a Clinton administration, Schumer as Senate Majority Leader, and Speaker Ryan in the House, that's a very, very good formula for us. But we need to be able to do the work now to really make sure that choice is clear, the voters make the right choice, and that House Republicans are in a position where they're leaning forward in constructive fashion. Good so far? How much time do I have left, by the way? Sorry.
You have 17 minutes.
17 minutes, okay. I only have 85 minutes left of content to go. So what's the strategy here? So this is, for us as the forum, let me take a second here to describe who we are. We're obviously an immigration advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. Been around since 1982. Our mission is to advocate for the value of immigrants and immigration to the nation. We're a little bit unique in the immigration space in that we can really work across the political spectrum with conservatives to moderates to folks on the left. And we try to do this in partnership with many of you in the room, but we also try to do this in a way that frankly creates vehicles for conservative leaders to be able to speak with their own voice to the need for immigrants and immigration in their respective community. So that means that we as an organization are not going to be engaged in the election. We're not going to pick a horse, although that can be hard sometimes, and we're not going to be in the business of registering voters. But it doesn't mean that we're going to avoid the politics of the election. So broadly speaking, I think the strategy falls into really down two lanes. For many of our colleague organizations, the strategy is voter education, registration, and turnout, whether it's C3 or C4, full stop. You know, this is about political power. It is about making sure that the Latino, the Asian, the new American vote, and their allies are registering in record numbers, naturalizing in record numbers, and turning out in record numbers. I think all indications at this point are very good. Whether you're, really whatever part of the country that you're in, we're seeing amazing numbers in terms of naturalization and voter registration. So that's a strategy for the left and really our colleague organizations. Our strategy really falls into this space of unlikely allies. So we are very focused on the engagement of faith, law enforcement, and business leaders across the country in target districts so that they are speaking to the need for immigrants and immigration in their communities. And this is important because at the end of the day, for a House Republican or even a Senate Republican to get to the finish line or get to yes on immigration, number one, they need to feel it's politically important, meaning that they see the pressure coming from the community. And that, I'm always very clear, is 70% of the fight. None of anything that we do as an organization is possible without the political strength and power of the community. But that final 30% more or less is because conservative constituents are telling that Republican this is the right thing to do. So, we can talk about examples and kind of things that we've done over the last 4 or 5 years in greater detail, but from our perspective, we want to make sure that the power that's being exhibited by the community is reflected by a constructive perspective from conservative constituencies across the country. And that's taken shape in a few different coalitions for us. In 2010, after the DREAM Act was defeated in December, we decided that we were going to just figure out what the space was. So I'll do a little hand mime here. We looked at the map, and the map was that in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West, is that right on your end? You had the least amount of support for immigration reform. That was where we got the majority of no votes in December of 2010. So we asked the question, okay, who's going to move those votes? Those same three regions, the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West, have the highest number of evangelicals, the greatest density of state and local law enforcement, and the fastest growth in the foreign-born population. So all we did is really overlap those four maps and realize that in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West, we needed to be able to focus in on faith, law enforcement, business leaders so that they were the ones speaking to the need for immigrants and immigration in their respective communities. The coalition came to be known as Bibles, Badges, and Business for Immigration Reform. A lot of message research went into that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, also known as an email to staff at 11 p.m. saying, hey, how does this sound? And in fact, I have to give credit to Adrian Walker with the Globe for kind of picking up the quote. That was the first place it appeared, and it's been all downhill from there. So what does that look like? It looks like on the first B for the faith community. We do an incredible amount of work with evangelical and Catholic leaders across the nation. There's a coalition called the Evangelical Immigration Table that ran radio ads in 15 states and over 60 congressional districts over the course of 2013 and 14, many, for example, in the state of Tennessee. An evaluator looked at that campaign, and each ad was about a 60-minute script speaking to the biblical underpinnings behind the need for immigration reform. It was a 6-second spot that ran on Christian radio stations in key districts. An evaluator looked at that campaign and found a 15-point drop in the opposition to immigration reform among conservative white evangelicals. A 15-point drop in opposition. Because what we were doing is reaching a community based on their language and their values, but providing them a way to say, okay, this is the right thing to do. It was a values-based conversation, so keep that in mind. So that's the faith community. And law enforcement, we worked with Chief Beal and many of his colleagues across the country to create something called the Law Enforcement and Immigration Task Force. This is now a task force of nearly 45 chiefs and sheriffs from across the country. Some leaning left, some leaning far right. What they do is come together quarterly or more often to talk about the implementation of executive actions from Department of Homeland Security. They come together to talk about the strategies to urge their members of Congress to be in the right place on immigration reform, but they most importantly lend their voices to the public debate. So that Law Enforcement and Immigration Task Force has been a very key partner in terms of bringing a law enforcement voice and leadership to this very, very tricky issue that I know plays out in your communities. And then on the business side, we do a lot of work with you all in the room and with organizations like Forward.us and the ag community in terms of bringing business communities into the fold at the right time. So Bibles Badges Business has been our primary coalition to advocate for immigration reform. Another coalition, another program that I wanted to share with you is called New American Workforce. Now this started with the story of Bethlehem Steel. Bethlehem Steel was the first company in the United States to provide English classes to their immigrant workforce. Guess what year that was? This is my opportunity to take some water.
1904.
Oh, very close. Another guess? I'm burning minutes here, people. 1915. Those are, quote, the good old days. So we started the program and it was called the Bethlehem Project. And we literally went to businesses and cities and asked them, are you a modern-day Bethlehem Steel? We've now rebranded the program to call it the New American Workforce. And we're working with over 200 businesses in 8 cities. Try to remember them here. Miami, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Jose, DC, New York, Detroit, and maybe one other one. With these businesses, we are helping them work with their immigrant workforce to become citizens. And it's an incredible story to be told because that business owner, instead of taking a position on legal versus undocumented, they're merely standing up and saying to their public, this is a workforce that's contributing to my bottom line, learning English, and becoming American. And the relevant part for you is that we're now working with cities. So we started with New York City. Cities meaning cities, the workforce within the mayor's offices. So in New York City, we started with one of their, I think it was the Health and Human Services Department, and we did an outreach session and started to enroll people who worked for the city of New York. Miami Beach, to their credit, was the first city to actually carve out money within their budget to help their staff on the application fee. So I think they paid one half of the naturalization application fee. I think about 20 people who work for Miami Beach, naturalized. Director Leon Rodriguez was just down there a few weeks ago for the naturalization ceremony. San Diego is talking about it, Los Angeles is talking about it, and I am 99% sure that every person in this room is going to be going back to their mayor and saying we should do this. Right? Adolfo, right? There we go. Chicago comes through. So New American Workforce. But it's a great way to engage businesses, but also employers writ large. So this is this is the part where I wanted to talk a little about kind of what's the role of your boss. Now, the fact is that most cities that you work for are progressive or liberal islands within regions that are much more politically diverse. So I've spent some time in Houston recently. Now, Houston is a city of, 1.3 million. Harris County is a county of 4.3 million. Harris County, Texas, is bigger than 24 states in the country. But it's politically incredibly diverse. So what is the message that's articulated by your mayor to his or her audience in their city, but that actually resonates with across the media market in that region. And that's I want to acknowledge that that's very tricky, but I also want to make the case that it's incredibly important. Because oftentimes when mayors talk about the importance of the immigrant community, they will talk about the importance of the immigrant community from a political perspective. Check, very, very important. Or from an economic perspective. Check, incredibly important. But go back to that radio ad campaign that I talked about. In that campaign, those pastors were not talking about immigrants as voters. They were not talking about immigrants as economic contributors. They were talking about immigrants as members of their congregation, as their neighbors, as the people that their kids that went to school with. And that, I think, is a real incredible opportunity for mayors across the country to, in a very, very partisan political environment, have that. Sometimes it could be a quiet conversation, sometimes it could be a public conversation with somebody who your mayor doesn't agree with publicly or politically. But have that conversation around including people, being more inclusive, being more welcoming, being more supportive of the immigrant community because it's important to the region. And that's why I think that the work that you're going to be talking about here today, but the work that Welcoming America and P&A does is so important because it provides the tools and the strategies to make that happen. But my bottom line here is that mayors are incredibly important leaders of cities, but also of economic and social regions. And those regions is where the politics of this issue takes place. So that's my ask, is to create the opportunities, create the vehicles, and create the conversation at a regional level with your mayor. Thank you. I think I'm supposed to, questions? Yeah. Okay.
So you talked about one of the things coming down the pipe is DACA and DAPA and that decision and the impact that that's going to have. Talking about it, if it's a positive for the immigrant community. In Philadelphia, and I know other cities that are represented here today, we're really interested in notario fraud, immigration services fraud. What impact do you think, because we believe in Philadelphia that's, if it is positive, it'll be great, but there'll also be some negative impacts on the community because people will use that as an opportunity to further the fraud and further taking advantage of their own immigrant communities in which they start these businesses. So have you all looked into any of that or have any?
So I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think notario fraud is going to be a huge problem if the court rules in favor of the program. I know that Department of Justice has started some internal thinking about the advisors that they're going to put out, but I would not wait for DOJ. I would say that at a local level, engage Spanish language media, engage your district attorneys, but state attorneys general are really, really important. I remember here in Massachusetts that the AGs were incredibly important. And I think that even if your attorney general is a Republican against deferred action, this is still their job to protect people from fraud. And I think that they will have the networks and the relationships that are much closer to the ground than Department of Justice.
Just to her question as well, I know that USCIS is creating local task force around preventing notario fraud. Yep. So getting in touch with your USCIS office and seeing how to pull in networks might be useful.
Thank you. I have two questions.
Sure.
The number one question is regarding the complexity of immigration issue. I'm asking what is the width the city has definitely to influence immigration policies versus the state. Would that, the second question, would that hinder the work of the state local officials in that aspect if the city is involved greatly in helping just immigration issue reform? And what the community can do in that aspect, it falls down at the Supreme Court level concerning DACA and DAPA.
Sure. So I think that cities play just an incredibly important role in the push for immigration reform. I think that whether it's a mayor standing alone saying this is why immigrants and immigration are important to, you know, my city's economy, social fabric, et cetera, is incredibly important. Because for a member of Congress or a representative or a senator, a city is, you know, that's where the votes lie, more cases than not. But I think the challenge is for a city, you know, like I said, for mayors to get outside of their city limits and create the relationships with you know, mayors around in their region. I mean, I know Mayor Garcetti has done a lot of work like this across Southern California and even up and down the state, working with some very, you know, conservative mayors. And I know that took, you know, some doing. Yeah. It doesn't come naturally to Democratic mayors, just like it doesn't come naturally to Republican mayors. And I think we have to understand that that's the way people are wired. But I think that, you know, presenting this as an opportunity to create new relationships and serve the interests of a region overall are very important. In terms of DACA, DAPA, I think that the other piece of this is that mayors can engage their national associations, like the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I think the conference this year is in Indianapolis. Is the issue coming up in Indianapolis at all this year? Do we know? Yeah. It is? Yeah. Great. Great. And then the National League of Cities is another large association. I just think that some of the big associations, the more that they are owning this in a kind of a top tier way, the better. And you know, the only way that happens is if their membership, i.e. your bosses, are the ones weighing in with them. And that can be with respect either to legislation or the implementation of DACA, DAPA. Good? Thank you. Thank you very much.